Bonjour à tous. Alors, on va passer sur la
Good
partie
morning, everybody.
troubles
Now we are
nutritionnels
going
et
to
comportements
talk
alimentaires.
about
Alors, je me
everything that
présente,
has
moi
to
je suis
do
professeure
with
Christine
eating
Poitou. Je
disorders
suis
and
médecin à
nutrition.
Pitié
My name is
Salpêtrière à
Christine
Paris.
Poitou. I'm a
Et
professor
donc, je
at
suis
Hospital
endocrinologue
Pitié Salpêtrière in,
nutritionniste
in
pour
Paris.
adultes.
I'm an
Et je coordonne aussi
endocrinologist
à la
by trade
Pitié le
and
centre de
specialist in
référence
nutrition.
maladies
I'm
rares,
also the
obésité et les causes
coordinator
rares,
of the
le
reference
syndrome de
center for
Poitou-Bernert,
rare
mais aussi tous les
diseases.
autres syndromes avec
I'm
troubles
a
du
specialist
comportement
of
alimentaire.
Prader-Willi
Et
syndrome, but
donc, je vais
also
faire
all
cette
syndromes with
présentation
an
en duo
associated
avec ma
eating
collègue Béatrice
disorder.
Dubern, qui
I
est donc
will
pédiatre
present
à
my
Trousseau,
talk
donc aussi à
with
Paris,
my colleague,
et qui,
Professor
elle,
Béatrice
fait la même
Dubern.
chose
She's a
que moi, mais chez
pediatrician
des
in
enfants.
Paris.
Et donc, on fait
She
la
does
transition
just the same thing as
des
I
enfants
do,
vers
but in
l'âge adulte.
children,
Et
while
elle a
I'm in
aussi
charge of
une
teenagers.
habilitation récente, depuis 2 ans,
She
centre de référence
is
maladie rare
also
Prague.
an expert. She
Donc, on
also
va
is the head
aborder
of
aujourd'hui
the
les aspects
specialized center for
nutritionnels
rare
dans le syndrome de
diseases.
Nissen-Held,
So
et
we
puis
are going
ensuite
to
vous faire
talk
un
about
petit
everything
sondage
that
de la
has to
fin
do
à
with
valider, hein, voilà,
nutrition. And like to start with a quick
sans,
survey, quick show
vote
of
vraiment
hand.
bien établi. Mais
This is
diriez-vous que les
nothing
personnes avec le
very
syndrome de
complex, but I
Nissen-Held
have a
ont des
question.
problèmes
Would you
d'excès de
say
poids, des problèmes
that
avec l'alimentation?
individuals
Vous
with a
pouvez lever la main si vous
MID1L
pensez que
syndrome,
oui.
do you think that they have
D'accord.
a problem
Et puis,
with
en fonction aussi
excess
de ce que
weight
Juliette a
or
dit tout à l'heure,
problems
on va le
with
voir
their
effectivement, c'est un
eating
problème
patterns?
relativement fréquent. On va
Well,
donc
obviously,
poser
yes,
les
it's a
bases
rather frequent
de ce
problem. The show
qu'on
of
appelle les
hands
problèmes
was
nutritionnels.
quite
Donc, on va surtout
significant.
parler
And we
aujourd'hui
are just
d'excès de
going
poids
to
et de troubles
provide
du
you with
comportement
background
alimentaire. On ne
information
parlera
as to
pas
what has to do
des
with excess
peut-être
weight.
problèmes
We are not
nutritionnels plus
going to
précoces avec des
talk
nutritions et on
about
pourra éventuellement l'aborder dans la
eating
discussion.
problems
Donc, pour évaluer
more
la
on
copie
the
blanche, les individus, on
malnutrition
utilise
side of things, but
l'index
more
s'appelle l'indice de
excess
masse
eating.
corporelle. En
We
anglais, on dit
use
body mass index. C'est
on
très
talk
facile à
about
calculer
BMI
l'IMC
in
puisqu'on
English. It's
utilise le
rather
poids
easy
et la
to
taille. Donc,
compute. You
dès
use
l'instant où on a
height
bien
and
mesuré le poids, bien
weight.
mesuré la taille, on a un
So
indice de masse
you
corporelle.
need obviously
Donc
to
les
have
définitions sont un peu
correct
différentes chez
data,
l'enfant et
but
chez
based on
l'adulte.
that, you just have
Là, je
simple
parle au nom de
math and you
Béatrice,
have
puisque c'est elle
BMI.
la
I'm
pédiatre. Donc
talking under
chez
the
les
control
enfants, on
of
utilise des
Beatrice
courbes
because she's a
d'IMC qui sont
pediatrician, but
différentes
in
chez les
children we
filles et
also
chez les
have
garçons. Et vous
curves,
voyez ces
curves
fréquences
that
en
are
noir ici, elles
different
évoluent en fonction
for
de l'âge. Donc c'est
girls
vraiment
and
très
boys.
important
And you see that
d'utiliser
those
ces courbes
curves
puisque
are
un indice de
different and
masse
they change
corporelle, par
over
exemple,
time.
à
So it's very important
20
to use those because
sera
a BMI
élevé, vous voyez, à 20,
of
on est dans le
20
vert ici, sera
is
élevé à
high,
6 ans
so you're
alors
in the
qu'il est
green phase. It's
finalement
high for a 6-year-old
tu peux
when
montrer si tu veux, voilà. Un indice
yes, you can show if you want.
corporel à 20,
So a
par exemple,
BMI
à
of 20
6 ans, voilà.
is
Il est au-dessus
high
des
at the
courbes,
age
alors
of
même que si on va
6.
beaucoup
So
plus
it's a
loin
child
en
that's
âge, peut-être
above
à 15 ans, ça sera
average, if
beaucoup
you will.
moins,
But
comme
later
dans
in life, at the age
les
of
petits enfants.
13 or
Donc c'est vraiment
14,
important de
it's
positionner
right
en
in
fonction de l'âge
average.
et
So
aussi en
it's very
fonction du
important
sexe.
to
Et
really
donc on a des
have
définitions
all the right
l'excès de
parameters.
poids. Donc
So
l'excès de poids,
age,
c'est, donc tu vas montrer
but
sur
also gender. And we also
c'est ce qu'on
have
appelle le
a definition
97e
of what is
percentile ou
excess weight.
IEC25,
This is what we call
c'est
the
dans le jargon, peu
98th
importe. Et puis on
percentile.
parle
We call
d'obésité
this
quand
IOTF
l'IMC
30.
est
So that's
au-dessus de l'IEC30.
overweight.
Voilà,
And
donc
when
Béatrice montre la
BMI
courbe
is
ici.
above IOTF
Tu peux
30,
montrer,
we
je sais pas
talk
si on voit très bien, qui
about
descend cette
true
courbe jusque
obesity.
juste
Yes, we're
presque la
trying to
courbe de
show you with a
l'IEC comme
pointer,
ça.
but it's not very self-explanatory nor very
Donc
clear.
ça c'est chez l'enfant
But
et chez les
yeah,
adultes.
that
Donc
is
on
what we
a
use. So that's in
la
children.
définition qui
And
dépend plus de
in
l'âge, donc à partir de
adults,
18 ans, dès
the
l'instant où on
definition
a
is
un
no
IMC
longer
supérieur à 25, donc en
age
rangement entre
dependent.
25 et 30, on
When
parle de
BMI
surpoids,
is
et
above
au-delà de 30, on parle
25,
d'obésité. Et puis
or
après,
rather
ça
over
passe
well, between
type 2 et
25
puis
and
35,
30 it's overweight,
catastrophe de 40.
and
En
above
fait,
30
pour
it's
l'OMS,
obesity class 1,
l'obésité, c'est un
above
excès de masse
40
grasse
obesity class 3.
néfaste pour la
According
santé,
to the
néfaste parce qu'il y a des
WHO,
complications, en
obesity
particulier
is
chez
an
les adultes,
excess body
des
fat,
complications
which is
cardio-métaboliques, des
deleterious to
complications
have
respiratoires,
with
des tas de complications.
cardiovascular,
Et ces
metabolic
classes, en fait,
complications, but also
d'IMC,
breathing
elles ont été
disorders. So you have
définies
different
en fonction
class
justement
or
de ce
classes
risque
of
de maladie,
BMI, and they are
de développer
based
des maladies,
on
notamment à l'âge
the
adulte, et
risk
aussi de
level,
ce
the
risque
risk you
de
have
décès.
to
Donc c'est
develop
comme
a
ça vraiment
disease
qu'elles ont
with
été
age, and also
et
you
donc
have
l'indice
an
de masse corporelle,
increased
comme c'est
risk
facile
of
pour les parents, c'est
mortality. The
très
higher
facile
the
à utiliser en
class, the
clinique. On va
higher
tracer un
the
peu risk. So BMI is rather easy to assess in the clinic, a lot more easy than if you were to assess the fat content. Well, we know that it has to be taken in stocks because some adults, when they age, they have less muscle and more fat content, if you will, but we try to use something that is simple and rather straightforward. Now, how do we control our weight? Well, it's a question of energy balance, contributions, if you will, what gets in and what gets out. So in neurodevelopment disorders, we know that the systems may be dysregulated, but in a nutshell, you get supply from food and you can have different quantities of supply depending on the quantity, but also on the quality, energy density. Sometimes you eat a small portion, but of something that is very dense. Alcohol provides a lot of calories, and eating disorders is certainly to be taken in consideration. And then you have what gets out, if you will. So first, you have your basic metabolism. So even if you are lying in your bed, you are still using some of the energy. And then, based on your age, your size, your height, your muscle mass, you increase this basic metabolism. Then there's a variable part to that expenditure, if you will, and that is movement. Obviously, you are going to spend more of that energy when you exercise, and so this is something on which on what you have an impact in our patients. Now, physical activity also has an impact on muscle mass, and therefore you can also increase your at-rest metabolism. So a number of levers that we can press, and then there are individual behaviors, psychological factors, emotions, sleep. A good quality of sleep is key. It's going to have an impact on the energy balance, tobacco use, and also medicine intakes. So those are behavioral patterns. There are also factors, and then you have biological factors. So you have genetic inheritance, if you will. We all inherit genes from our parents with variants that will or will not trigger a disorder, but there are frequent changes in genes, variants, and with them, you're going to have a higher or lesser risk to be overweight. There are also genetic abnormalities that will completely change the way your brain works, and neurotransmission is going to be impacted. We'll come back to that in a moment. Then there may also be abnormalities of adipose tissue development. Your microbiome may also be affected. Now, we haven't talked in particular about MIT1L so far. I'm just talking generally for a number of disorders. Weight gain in neurodevelopmental disorders at large is well studied. There are potentially more contributions because of eating disorders, and also there's less use. For example, in Down syndrome, there's early obesity because there's less muscle tone. That's also what we have in the disorder of interest. So again, the at-rest metabolism is very low, so much so that even if you eat just a bit more than usual, you may put on weight. And obviously, if you do little exercise, again, any change in your balance, in your energy balance, is going to translate in weight gain. So in neurodevelopmental disorders, there are dysregulation in the brain. So what you take and what you use is not managed in the same way. You have on top of that dysregulation in your emotions. You may have sleep disorders. Also, some of those patients use psychotropic drugs, anti-epileptic like Dipakine, neuroleptics. So they are prescribed to help with behavioral disorders, but the downside of those is that they have an impact centrally in the brain, in the way your energy is stored and used. Now, obesity, we can say that obesity is a genetic disorder. The most frequent forms of obesities are what we name a common obesity. Usually they appear when the patient hits puberty, and usually it's a polygenic form. So you inherit genes from your parents, and usually there's a family history of overweight or obesity. More than 1,000 genes or loci have been identified, and those genes are mostly present in some area in the reward system. And then you have more rare forms when you have just one gene impacted, monogenic forms as we call them. So it's a more rare form, and then you have an increased risk of obesity. So your environment and what you do, etc., still has a major impact, and Béatrice will come back to that. That will have an impact, but the gene that this person carries is really what explains why they put on weight. Those genes usually regulate a very important part in the brain, which we name hypothalamus. So in the presentation this morning, we are really going to focus on both forms. In our reference center, we have both forms of obesity. We have a PMDS, if you will, which is in a way a description of all rare obesity, Prader-Willi, Fragile X syndrome, and MIT1L is amongst those syndromes that increase the risk of early obesity. When I talk about early obesity, it's before puberty. So often you're going to have eating disorders, neurodevelopmental disorders as well. So obesities that are closely linked to neurodevelopmental disorders. Now, I know that those graphs are not easy to understand, but I'm going to try to make them easier to read. So how do we regulate our food intake? Hypothalamus is a small part in our brain where we create an homeostasis. Homeostasis is what creates a balance by sending signals. So signals are sent and tell you, well, you should not eat anymore because you just have enough. And there's a connection between the brain, but also the gut. There are hormones, what we call hormones, and those hormones are sent to the brain saying, well, okay, I'm fine, don't send more food. And you also have leptin when you have enough fat, adipose tissue. And so you have different regulations from the gut, from the cells, from the brain. And in hypothalamus, we have neurons. And again, I'm not going to give the names of all of those because it's pretty complex. But this is what we call the leptin-melanocortin pathway, very important pathway in hypothalamus. And in those obesities that are rare, those pathways and those neurons are damaged, if you will. We think, well, when we look at the different symptoms in MIT1L, we think that there's probably an impact on that pathway, or maybe some pathways that downregulate this. And then we have the hedonic regulation, the reward system that's in the more common forms of obesity. We all have a tendency to see food as a reward. Reward is a source of pleasure, and in some individual you feel the urge to take more food that you should for problems of hedonic deregulation. So you have here the different parts that are involved, the incumbent nucleus, and you see all those lines and all those arrows, which really explain that everything is connected. So if one of your neurons is impacted, it will have an impact down the line on other areas. Now, what's very important as well is the prefrontal cortex. In the child, there is less impact on food intake. Usually food intake in children is pretty much regulated by parents, and in adults it's more of a self-regulation. You were trained over time to reduce your food intake. So it's something that appears over time, and sometimes it's a lifelong process. So on top of those, there are other modulating factors. We may experience hunger when we ate 1 hour before. So stress, trauma, emotional dysregulation, stigma, boredom are as many factors that may have an impact on eating behavior. Then we also have extrinsic factors. Really depends on how you were taught how to eat in your family, in your culture, how you discovered food, etc., food availability, etc. We also talk about the impact of psychotropic drugs and sleep disturbance. There's a central regulation of sleep. It has an impact on how much you eat. All this to say that eating behavior is a multifactorial subject. It varies throughout life, and this, of course, also in connection with external factors.
So eating disorders can be multiple and varied, but what we're talking about today are the signals that I talked about: hunger, feeling full, satiety, not being hungry between meals, being able not to eat for at least 3, 4, 5 hours, being able not to eat all night long. If you can't fast for more than 9 or 10 hours at night, then maybe you might have satiety problems. But you can also have tachyphagia. That means when you eat too fast. I mean, this is quite a problem because I talked about the intestinal hormones and the connection with the brain, telling them, oh, I'm having something to eat, so I feel better, I feel satiated. But when you eat too fast, those signals take longer. I mean, they take a bit of time to get to the brain. And so if you eat too fast, that means that you're not giving those signals time to get to the brain. Impulsive eating, looking for food, and other disorders as well might exist. Now let's go back to the My1TL syndrome and what Juliette shed light on in her study. You can see that there were 40 different people studied, median age of 8.4 years, children, young children, but also adults, and 60% were overweight or obese, and almost half of them had eating disorders, official eating disorders. These are weight curves. They vary a lot from one person to another, but it does show that there are children that are really putting on weight early, and it's a little bit small, but that's maybe the 97th percentile. Yes, okay, with weight gain that starts to kick in very early. Now, these are the slides that Juliette gave me. That's what she's working on at the moment. We're not going to show you the results because she's currently analyzing those results, but she has been able to interview families, children, adults, and draw up questionnaires. Béatrice will go over those a little bit later, but these questionnaires were used in clinical practice to try and decipher food eating disorders, to track them over time. And for instance, here, this is the CEBQ, the Child Eating Behavior Questionnaire. It's a fairly straightforward questionnaire. A few questions: my child likes to eat a lot, eats more if they're worried, has a big appetite, finishes their meal quickly, etc., etc. So these are to do with emotional eating or problems with feeling full, being sensitive to food. I mean, there are different dimensions included in this questionnaire and covered by it, but Béatrice will go into more detail later. And in the study that Juliette is currently working on, there are 20 patients, some children, mostly children, some adults, spread roughly evenly. 9.5 is the median age, but the age at which eating disorder is really identified is early. It's about age 3. So once again, these are rare causes of obesity, and there is a risk of developing these eating disorders very early on for this disorder. So Béatrice now will give you a little bit more information on the care pathway for this. Hi. Thank you, and I'm very happy to be here. And as a pediatrician, as Christine just said, and thanks to Juliette's work, we can see that food and eating problems begin very early on in life, very early for these children. And as a pediatrician, I'm very interested in nutrition and children, and I often see families that can very early on describe eating disorders, the eating disorders of their children that they have observed. And I'm going to try to show you with a few slides what the signals are. What should you be looking out for when you notice that kind of behavior to try and stop obesity kicking in? Now, over time, as Christine said, once you reach adulthood, obesity problems appear, and even more so when you have a neurodevelopmental problem. So the most important thing I would say, we tend to say, oh, it's just what I'm putting on the plate that generates the weight problems. And as Christine said, it's very, very multifactorial. So, you have to take into account everything, and you have to get a wide range of expertise to work on this. And that's what we are trying to do. You need to really make a comprehensive assessment. Look at the BMC curve, that's one thing, and try and identify when the weight increase started, because these eating problems, the median age for that is 3, as we just saw, but the genetic problems are, the median age is 8. So it's not always easy when we're dealing with very young children to identify why. So you need to take into account the BMI curve with these kinds of patients and to really go over the history of that child and see exactly when the eating disorders began. Were there changes in their eating behavior? What happened? Did they have a change in their life? So obviously, not enough exercise obviously has an impact. A range of other things as well have an impact. You need to be seen by a doctor, but by other experts as well. The food, access to food, also important. I mean, I'm talking a lot about children, but the same goes for adults. If patients have easy access to food, that can be a problem. An open kitchen, you might want your children to become autonomous, so you give them a credit card, but maybe that doesn't help them because they tend to buy compulsive food compulsively. And sometimes if you have a frustrated young person or child, you want to feed them, give them something to eat to calm them down. Should we be doing that? Should we not be doing that? These are things that we are trying to think about and analyze. Sometimes when you mean well, you in fact do something that has a direct impact on weight gain for your child or for that young person. So we need to find ways of rewarding or soothing a child that don't have anything to do with food. And we're trying to better understand food behavior, and questionnaires are very useful for this, because when you want to improve somebody's eating behavior or want to leverage something, you need to understand the holistic dimensions of that. As Christine said, is it about looking at their food, what their favorite food is? Is it about the quantities? Are they eating too fast? Are they finding it hard to control themselves? All of these things are important to explore. Everybody's different after all, and we need to know all of this to be able to make tailor-made advice. And of course, all of the other things, cultural aspects. In some cultures, visions of weight is different. In some cultures, having a healthy round baby, a little bit overweight, is a very good thing. And we need to take that into account. Maybe there are other weight problems for other people in the family. That's also useful to know. You need to take all of that into account. And maybe the family isn't ready to hear about this or to try and implement changes. You need to change people's lifestyle. It's really about their intimacy, and sometimes people are not quite ready to do that. And you need to look at how people live as well, and this is important as well, because all of these measures need to be logical. They need to fit into somebody's life, into the family's lives, but it also needs to fit into their life when they're at school, when they're at their aunt's, or whatever. You know, it needs to feel logical for a child. I mean, I know I'm focusing on children, but it also applies to adults. Everybody needs to be able to really put all of these measures in place. Now, how can you assess people's eating behavior? Christine mentioned questionnaires, and of course, when you have a diagnosis, you're working with that, then of course you use the questionnaires. But sometimes you don't have that diagnosis. So, that can be trickier. I think all of you here have a diagnosis, so you're looking at those things. But I work with neurogeneticians a lot, and I see children who don't yet have that diagnosis, but who do have weight problems. And when we see neurodevelopmental disorders and weight problems, we try and help the families. We try and better understand all of the dimensions at play. And that ties in with what Christine was saying. Is my child obsessed with food? Because sometimes parents just don't notice it. Are they eating too much? Are they very sensitive to anything to do with food? Sometimes if you take your child to the supermarket, food shopping, you can see that hyperstimulation, the lights, the fact that there's a lot of food on show makes it hard for them to control themselves. That's a hyperstimulation. Those are difficult moments sometimes for some families, and that is also a food disorder, behavioral disorder as well. Here are some other questions. Another approach, it's eating score, if you like, appetite score. You need to be able to say how hungry you are. Where do you sit on the hunger scale? That can be difficult, even if you don't have a disorder. So that can be a good way to try and identify how hungry somebody is. And that can be useful if you are thinking about treatment. We've talked about various different medication, but it's useful to see how some medicines can impact hunger. So that's very useful for us to know. Other scales that we use, we ask questions, for instance, to try and assess the situation. Are they obsessed with food, etc., etc.? I mean, I'm not going to talk to you about eating vegetables or whatever. No. Absolutely not, because that is not what we're talking about. It's not about what they're eating. It's more about how they deal with it, what their behavior is, how they react to eating and to food and to quantities. If the child is obsessed and eats between meals or hides the food and eats it, etc. There's another questionnaire I think that's really interesting, and it's the Dykens questionnaire. This assesses hyperphagia. So that is a behavior where somebody's actively seeking out food, being obsessed with food. So thanks to this assessment, you see, we can assess another dimension. And it enables, all of these assessments enable us to really tailor our advice. Now, in this Dykens questionnaire, the pathological threshold is 19. And what's interesting about this questionnaire is that it talks about emotions as well. When you're anxious, for instance, you might feel like eating more easily. And I think that for the Me-1TL syndrome, I think children are very anxious, aren't they? And so that can bring on a desire to eat. And it's comfort eating, okay? they can't control it. So we can see that in other situations as well. Right. Now, that being said, what should we do about it? I mean, it's one thing to identify all of this. How should we act? Well, according to the studies, according to experience and sharing experience, there are 4 things that are very important, and you need to set this in place as early as possible, because even for teenagers or for adults, habits are already formed, and so it's very hard to kill them. Now, these eating disorders can be identified very early on, and as soon as you do, you should implement these 4 pillars: control and restrict access to food. I'll show you exactly how to do that according to the age gaps, maintaining regular meal times, and I've shown you a plate here with compartments in it. It's like a little ritual around food to try and work on how much you should be eating, so that the child can understand that what they're eating is on this tray and not outside of the tray. So this can also help you educate them. It's this and nothing else, okay? You can also anticipate risky situations. You need to manage general behavior, anxiety, etc. You also need to stay active, and that's something that we really focus on with children. I mean, often they are hyperactive, but that's not always the case. So they have to get up and about and move and do exercise as much as possible to have a low BMI. And you need to coordinate all of the actors together, including the families. And I want to underline the importance of grandparents, because sometimes the grandparents say to their children, "Oh, you're a bit mean to your child," and you have to say to them that it's wrong to let them put weight on. You need to tell the grandparents as well that they need to be careful. It's not a question of punishing your children when you tell them to be careful about what they're eating. It's for their own good. But of course, I know that's easier said than done. Sometimes a problem with mothers-in-law, but we won't go into that too much. Now, how can we set a regular framework for eating? This is what we've developed here in our PNDS, and it varies according to the age of the patient. So roughly 3 different age brackets here. When it starts very early, in some genetic forms, we have to help these families very early on with the meal times, and we tell them not to eat between meals. Okay, that is what we mean by meal regularity. There has to be a time when the child is fasting, if you will, in between meals. So meals are a ritual, even if you have to, bring mealtime forward because the child is too impatient. The environment has to adapt to the child's needs, and I have one message to tell you in this respect. Children and teenagers can adapt, but it should really be the environment that adapts to them, because they are having trouble regulating all of this. So it's very hard for them to do that. Now, once they are at school, the dietitian can help them, or the nutritionist can help them learn about how much of each kind of food you should be eating. It's not about telling them to eat vegetables. It's just little tips, if you like. Okay? So saying to them, okay, your family is going to regulate what is going to go in the container, but the child knows they have 3 things in the morning, for instance. 3 things in the morning, 3 things at lunch, 3 things for tea time, etc. It doesn't matter what it is. It's just a thing, okay? And the child knows, I'm going to get 3 things for breakfast, 3 things for lunch, etc., etc. And you can change one of those things, a cake or a yogurt, and we work on trays that they like, with a superhero that they like on, or a nice colourful bowl or whatever. So you're controlling the quantity, but you're also making them happy, because if they like whatever superhero, then that's a way of channeling their attention and helping them accept that they should only be eating their allocated quantity of food. They shouldn't be eating their brothers or their siblings, but neither should their sibling be coming to eat from their plate. So this is the kind of thing that we mean. Menus pictograms, those things are also very useful, and anticipating risky situations. If you're not sure how things are going to go, I mean, I know this is a real psychological burden for families, try and anticipate that you're going to a wedding or a hotel and there's going to be a buffet and it's going to be, as much as you can eat kind of thing. In those situations, you have to set a framework and you say to your child, well, you can eat this, but no more. You have to try and help them control, and you have to plan. Okay. Maybe it's nearly lunchtime. I can hear some of you reacting. But once you reach adulthood, it's the same. There should be no doubts. So no, dreaming about something else. I mean, the child knows what they're going to have. So no anticipation. That's how it is, period. And that means that you have a lever as well to use. And you say, no, this is how we said it was going to be. There is nothing else. And with time, children should accept this. I mean, obviously not the first time, but gradually you manage to make that work. And I hope that that also helps with frustration when there's an unforeseen situation. I mean, it's not a magic bullet, but these are just tips, okay? That should help. We work a lot on helping parents not stimulate their children. Nothing should be out, no food out in the kitchen, okay? No visual stimulation, even an apple just sitting there in the fruit bowl. No, not even an apple. Everything should be shut away in boxes, in cupboards. If the child can go and rummage around, then you need to put it somewhere where they can't. I'm dealing with a family that have two children with disorders. They have two kitchens, right? I know not everybody can do that, but they have a day-to-day kitchen with nothing in it and another kitchen where they cook and where they keep all the food. Now, I know not everybody can do that, but this is that, for instance, is an illustration of how you can restrict access to that food when it shouldn't be there. And for adults, be careful when they reach autonomy. If they do have eating disorders, again, try and avoid things that stimulate them. Young people who have pocket money and use it to go and buy food. The parents think that everything's fine, but no, they're going to buy food. So it's a challenge. Autonomy is a challenge. Becoming independent is a challenge. And that's something that we need to look at on a case-by-case basis. And as far as behavior goes, again, try and anticipate things. No surprises, okay? And you have to learn to trust each other. That's very important. Food should not be used to punish or to reward. And that's important. Sometimes if you have eating disorders, you stimulate them by saying, come on, we're going to hospital. Oh, you did so well. Let's go and have an ice cream. I don't necessarily say anything, but that's terrible. I mean, if you come to hospital, you get an ice cream. I'd rather it was something else. But of course, I understand it. I'm not judging you. I know how difficult it is. But it's not ideal. So all of these things need to be implemented as early as possible at home. Prevention. And of course, some things work, some things don't. But the more you think about ritualization and regular meal times, the better it will be. Think about screens. Think about the atmosphere at the dinner table, at the lunch table. Those are things you can work on and improve to make those moments pleasurable. And you can get easy tips about this. For instance, reduce the time you're exposed to food, identify risky situations, schools, shops, etc. Anticipate the occasional outings. It's not about changing your life, but it's about identifying the risky situations and anticipating them. Sport, very important. As soon as they can, even very young, they should be focusing on that. And in relation to hypertonia, we often talk about this about physiotherapy. You know, that's very important. And as soon as there's hypotonia, sport. It's to help prevent weight gain and to make them more healthy. I mean, this should be part and parcel of any therapy. And there are more and more things being found. I mean, special sporting activities. We are working on that. Things have happened and moved forward. We saw that in the Olympic Games. Of course, there is still a long way to go. But you have to make sure, you know, for instance, if the child is overweight, sport has to happen every day. And sometimes it works. See, here there was diagnosis, the weight was stabilized and improved for this patient. Gets back to normal BMI level, still a little bit overweight, but stabilized. So that's very positive. And finally, on my last slide, you can see here, there's a tiny upturn. This patient is 12. And the challenge here is, of course, adolescence. That's a transition. And that's also a very, very risky time. Maybe for those of you who have younger children, you should know this. It's a risky time because they want to break free. They want their independence. They change their behavior. They change a lot of things. And we can see this as well with weight. There is often weight gain during the teenage years, during adolescence. And if you've set up a virtuous behavior before that, it can help. It can help, you know, keep that in check. So really focus on this throughout life, right from the beginning. Work with experts who know about adult obesity and eating disorders, and they can help you transition and help that patient really stay on track. You need to be in touch with the right experts who know the situation. And it's not always easy. We are seeing that more and more with the rare disease centers, but not enough. So I've now concluded. I'll just conclude quickly. As you can see, obesity is very complex, and you need to take into account a lot of different things, specifically when you've got this neurodevelopmental disorder. We've got this PMDS to help our colleagues, but you need to help those people and provide support throughout their life, right from an early age, to make sure that that weight gain doesn't happen too much too early and before adulthood, because that is when there's a problem. I mean, you don't see massive problems very early on, but you do in adulthood, and it's just an extra handicap that you have to deal with, and that's what we want to avoid, because we don't want to you know, make it even harder for these people. So centers are being set up, and you need to try and identify the one that's closest to you. There are pediatricians, etc. There are the PADOR centers, which really focus on neurodevelopmental disorders and obesity. It's not the same sector. We say rare deficiencies, but it's overall very similar. And of course, a team helping you. So this is the team at the Trousseau Hospital. We're just 4 subway stops away, so that's great. We have a really broad team of experts, dietitians, pedopsychiatrists, etc. A lot of these people working together. And I think Christine has a few final words to say as well. Oh, yes, I also have a multidisciplinary team, a dietitian, not enough psychologists, I would say, for adults, but we work in conjunction with the Sainte-Anne Psychiatric Hospital. We've got a great coordination going, and we've got some great support for families. In adults, in these kinds of obesity with neurodevelopmental disorders, the problems start roughly at 25, and that's when the care pathway becomes very complex. So you need to be in that care pathway before. Thank you for your attention, and of course we are sticking around for any questions.